A seguir, como 39 pessoas reacenderam um debate que existe há 50 anos, tirando a própria vida. Saiba por que Roswell, no Novo México, se tornou sinônimo de segredos do governo. Explore os mais novos e incríveis relatórios de algumas das fontes mais confiáveis. Investigue os inacreditáveis casos que preocuparam o mundo todo, incluindo 2 casos que os militares só agora aceitam comentar. Chegue ao fundo do lado mais polêmico do fenômeno. Abduções. Na Terra, as extraordinárias explicações para a existência de OVNIs. Descubra por que os cientistas acreditam poder encontrar as respostas que mudarão para sempre nosso modo de encarar o universo e o que existe nele. Tudo isso e mais em OVNI 2. Já fomos visitados? Em 25 de março de 1997, 39 pessoas fizeram as malas, se vestiram de preto, se cobriram com mantos roxos e se suicidaram. Elas foram encontradas um dia depois. A explicação sobre sua minuciosa preparação para a morte foi encontrada na fita de vídeo que seu líder, Marshall Applewhite, deixou na casa.
Spacecrafts. Even my father's kingdom moves in spacecrafts. We don't believe that our Father's kingdom has much need for these flesh bodies, but it's possible that a spacecraft will come down and we'll walk on board that craft and they'll take these bodies from us and issue us the ones that belong to that level so that we might begin service.
A chocante notícia de suas mortes foi a última de uma série de acontecimentos que novamente alimentaram calorosos debates sobre a existência de OVNIs e seus ocupantes. Para os céticos, cientistas e investigadores de OVNIs ou ufólogos, as pessoas do Portal do Paraíso são consideradas membros de uma seita. Mas as 39 pessoas chamadas de viajantes ressuscitaram um argumento de 50 anos de idade que começou no deserto perto de Roswell, Novo México, em 1947. O incidente de Roswell se tornou o ponto inicial da polêmica sobre os OVNIs. Ainda hoje, há quem alegue que o governo recolheu destroços de uma nave alienígena que continha ocupantes, alguns mortos e outros vivos. Nos últimos 50 anos, o governo negou que isso tenha acontecido. Mas no início contava uma história bem diferente.
We look at what's being said in the newspapers by the various spokesmen, and they're saying basically, we don't know. They're consulting with scientists who are saying, we don't know. They're consulting with other governmental leaders who are saying, we don't know. They're consulting with everyone, trying to find out. But in the Pentagon, at the top, they're panicked because they have no clue as to what's going on. The longer this thing transpires, the less panic there is because it's not the beginning of an invasion.
Menos de uma semana após os primeiros relatórios, o governo parecia pronto para deixar o incidente de Roswell para trás. Eles divulgaram uma declaração pública oficial. Era um balão meteorológico, mas para muitos essa conclusão estava longe de ser correta. Para eles a pergunta continuava: nós fomos visitados? Talvez a resposta para essa pergunta tenha se tornado óbvia quando outras pessoas disseram ter visto OVNIs. O governo não tinha escolha, a não ser reavaliar a questão. Logo após Roswell, o governo pediu uma revisão mais detalhada. O tenente-general Nathan Twining, do Comando Aéreo Nacional, ficou responsável pela investigação. Sua pesquisa foi enviada a seus superiores e era muito diferente dos primeiros relatórios sobre Roswell.
The phenomena reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. It is recommended that Headquarters Army Air Forces issue a directive assigning a priority, security classification, and code name for a detailed study of this matter.
Essa questão seria confidencial e conhecida só pelos militares como Projeto Sign.
They've given it a priority of 2A, which is almost the highest. It's got a classification of secret. They produce an estimate of the situation. And what that estimate said was that UFOs, flying saucers, the flying discs, were extraterrestrial in origin. It went all the way to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who said, I don't find this document particularly persuasive. He batted it back down and fired practically everybody in Project Sign. The people who were left at Project Sign could read the handwriting on the wall. If you said they were extraterrestrial, you lost your job. Your career was over.
Em dezembro de 1948, entusiastas militares foram substituídos por céticos e o Projeto Sign recebeu o nome de Projeto Grudge, que significa má vontade, demonstrando preconceito contra OVNIs. Então, em 1952, um novo homem foi indicado para liderar o Projeto Grudge. Em poucos meses, ele foi reativado e recebeu um novo nome. Ele se tornou o Grupo Fenômenos Aéreos, codinome Projeto Blue Book.
The objectives of the program are twofold. They're the same as they have been since 1953 when the regulation was written. First of all, to try to determine if the UFO phenomena presents a threat to the security of the United States. And second, to determine if the UFO phenomena exhibits any technological advances which could be channeled into research and development.
Project Blue Book is born out of Project Grudge, and suddenly, for a short period of time, about 18 months, we have a legitimate investigation where the officers at Project Blue Book are trying to find out what's going on. They're gathering data. They're consulting with scientists. They're restructuring the whole program.
Enquanto o governo se protegia atrás de investigações secretas sobre o que chamavam de relatórios sérios sobre OVNIs, o fenômeno parecia haver despertado a imaginação do povo. De repente, pessoas que diziam ter visto OVNIs começaram a surgir. Elas contavam histórias fantásticas de visões e até de contatos com extraterrestres.
On some occasions, the messages are received by shortwave. On other times, by means of modulated light beam reception equipment. On a few occasions, they've even come by long-distance telephone.
My name is Hunno Mayberry, and I've been seeing flying saucers for as long as I can remember.
How many trips have you made to outer space?
Well, I'd say 350 or a few more.
When was the last one?
Well, first part of June.
And who did you go with?
Well, people from Jupiter.
They told me that language was no barrier to them anywhere. They could speak any language.
Your name is?
I am name is Isurus.
Where do you come from?
The planet Venus.
I suppose you know why I'm telling you this, so you won't shriek or shake your fist when you discover Martians do exist. They're real nice fellas.
A febre dos OVNIs havia tomado conta do país, mas na década de 60, o interesse do governo diminuiu.
The Air Force investigated for 22 years and decided there's nothing to it. They're just mirages, it's hoaxes, it's misidentifications, it's people not understanding what's in the air around them. And the Air Force issued a press release in 1969 and said, of the 12,000 sightings that have been reported to us, only 700 were unidentified, and that's really not a significant number. What they don't tell you is in their own statistics, at least 4,000 are listed as insufficient data for a scientific analysis, which means there is no explanation, but they're not labeled unidentified.
Em 17 de dezembro de 1969, o projeto Blue Book foi oficialmente encerrado. Estariam os militares mais interessados em inventar desculpas do que procurar explicações? E por quê?
The military is used to having an identifiable enemy. And when you get objects that defy all conventional performance, totally outperform our best jets, for example, this is something that's out of control. The military, to acknowledge the existence of UFOs, would have to also say, yes, they're real and we can't do a thing about it. I mean, they're so far superior to anything we have that we have no control over it. And I can't imagine anybody being willing to say that.
50 anos depois, ainda há inúmeros casos que simplesmente não podem ser explicados. Em vez disso, esses casos exigem respostas sérias para as seguintes perguntas. Existem fenômenos naturais simples ou talvez extraordinários que produzam a aparência de objetos voadores não identificados e seus ocupantes? Ou já fomos realmente visitados? Discos voadores, espaçonaves, bolas de plasma, luzes voadoras e estranhas criaturas foram relatados por mais de meio século. Mas apesar dos melhores relatos das fontes mais confiáveis, muitos ainda relutam para dizer sim à questão. Já fomos visitados?
Statistically, astronomers know that there's life out there somewhere. And the chances of it being intelligent life is debatable, but it's possible that somewhere in the universe there are creatures like us. Now, whether they're coming here is a very tricky question because we don't have the physical evidence. We don't have the chunk of saucer in our hand, and abductees haven't brought back a towel from the Zeta Reticuli Hilton. We don't have any of the good stuff that definitely proves that somebody has been here.
O fenômeno OVNI, seja real ou imaginário, provoca fortes reações. Aos que acreditam em sua existência e os que jamais acreditarão.
If it were recognized that we have and have had visitors from space for a long time who are interacting with our crafts, affecting our lives to some degree, then this has powerful implications. So it's not going to be easy for people to digest. In fact, over the years, I've mellowed from being harshly critical of the Air Force and the government to saying, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes.
A preocupação do governo com o fenômeno OVNI foi revelada num estudo de 1961 feito para a NASA pelo Instituto de Pesquisa Brookings, um dos maiores do país, intitulado Consequências da Descoberta de Vida Extraterrestre. Ele identifica aqueles que seriam mais afetados pela existência de formas de vida alienígena.
It has been speculated that of all groups, scientists and engineers might be the most devastated by the discovery of relatively superior creatures, since these professions are most clearly associated with the mastery of nature rather than with the understanding and expression of man.
Mais de 35 anos após esse estudo, muitos cientistas concordam que não é uma questão complicada de aceitação, mas sim de logística.
It's a long way from the nearest star, and it's even farther from the nearest star that would likely have planets and have another civilization. It's many light years, and with the laws of physics as we know them, it's not possible to send things at close to the speed of light and slow them down when they arrive at their destination. And so it takes a long time, longer than a human life, to go to the nearest star.
I have heard scientists and astronomers argue that they can't get here from there, and I totally reject that argument. I think it's almost laughably anthropocentric. I mean, is Earth science and technology the pinnacle of achievement in the universe? We have no way of knowing that. And it's up to us to adjust our worldview and our theories to figure out what's going on.
Well, I have to concede the possibility that the scientific laws as we know them will be different from the ones that we will know in the 25th century. On the other hand, we have to understand this phenomenon from our own cultural and historical perspective, and that involves the laws of science that we know now. If we get into the business of hypothesizing laws that we don't know, we're just in fairyland.
Mas a quantidade e a qualidade dos depoimentos dá uma importância indiscutível ao assunto.
The fact that so many credible people have seen incredible things and have no real reason to try to ask for publicity or try to make these things known other than the fact that they were disturbed by them. That set of observations makes you extremely curious as a scientist to understand what they saw.
De acordo com uma pesquisa de 1991, 7% da população americana alega já ter visto um OVNI. Essa porcentagem equivale a mais de 12 milhões e meio de pessoas. E essas pessoas são descritas como sendo mais ricas e mais cultas que a maioria. Elas incluem políticos, líderes comunitários e educadores. Mas de todas essas profissões de respeito, há uma que se destaca bastante: pilotos de avião. Em 24 de junho de 1947, menos de 2 semanas antes do incidente de Roswell, Kenneth Arnold informou sobre 9 objetos estranhos, vistos à frente das montanhas Cascades, cobertas de neve no estado de Washington. Sua respeitável reputação de empresário e piloto deu credibilidade à sua visão, e a imprensa deu destaque à história. Logo depois surgiram outras notícias de visões. Arnold ficaria conhecido para sempre como o homem que começou tudo. Mas isso foi apenas o começo.
Dark 05, 327.1, 327.1.
Em 25 de março de 1995, o comandante, o primeiro oficial e um comissário de bordo do voo 564 da América West da rota entre Tampa e Las Vegas viram algo estranho no céu próximo a Bovina, Texas.
Cactus 564, man.
Yeah, off to our 3 o'clock. Get some strokes out there. Can you tell us what it is?
Right now, I don't know what it is right now.
Às 10h25 da noite, o jato de passageiros voava a uma altitude de 11.900 metros e a tripulação continuava olhando para o objeto que piscava abaixo deles. À medida que avançavam para o oeste, o objeto também mudava de posição. Aqui está a conversa original entre o primeiro oficial e o Centro de Controle de Tráfego Aéreo de Albuquerque.
564, can you pay that object at all on your radar?
Cactus 564, no I don't. Talking to the 3 or 4 guys around here, no one knows what that is. Never heard about that.
But nobody's painting it at all?
Okay, Cactus 564, say again?
There's nothing on the radars on the other centers at all on that particular area, that object that's up in the air?
It's up in the air?
Affirmative.
No, no one knows anything about it.
Em um certo momento, o objeto se moveu na frente de uma nuvem de trovoada e à luz de um raio a tripulação pôde ver melhor.
What's the altitude about?
I don't know, probably right around 30,000 or so, and it's with the strobe, it starts from going counterclockwise, and the length is unbelievable.
A experiente tripulação do avião estava vendo algo, mas os controladores ainda estavam no escuro. Nenhum alvo desconhecido foi captado pelo radar, mas o controlador decidiu procurar balões meteorológicos e possível atividade militar na região. Ele contatou a base Cannon da Força Aérea.
Cannon 21.
Cannon, go ahead.
Hey, do you guys know if there was anything like a tethered balloon or anything released that should be above tie band?
No, we haven't heard nothing about it.
Okay. Guy at 39,000 says he sees something at 30,000 that the length is unbelievable and it has a strobe on it.
Uh-huh.
This is not good. Okay.
What does that mean?
I don't know. It's a UFO, so it's that Roswell crap again.
Em 25 de março de 1995, aquela porcaria de Roswell ressurgiu mais uma vez. E como Roswell, esse incidente ainda não foi explicado. Anos já se passaram e a tripulação do voo 564 não modificou sua história. No entanto, ainda hoje, eles preferem permanecer anônimos.
There's a lot of confusion, a lot of hesitancy about even reporting something like this, even in FAA, even in military. They're going to think we're crazy. I don't want to be grounded. Risking something here. And a lot of airline pilots feel that way too. Why should I report this? I don't want to be under medical microscope here. I'm not losing my mind.
Airlines don't like to employ people who see strange things. If you have a reputation in your company or your Air Force squadron as being the guy who saw the UFO from your F-18, I'm not sure I want to fly wing with him. You see, it's a subtle thing. Again, it goes back to denial. It's easier just to deny it and say, all right, he's an oddball. She just saw something that just couldn't be seen, so she's probably not as reliable as she should be.
A reputação está em jogo. Muitos relutam em romper seu silêncio. Mas nas raras ocasiões em que aqueles a quem confiamos nossa segurança nacional decidem falar, nós podemos deixar de ouvir? Por mais de 50 anos, histórias de estranhas visões foram relatadas. A maioria foi explicada, mas há algumas que ainda são um mistério. Nesses casos, talvez um conhecimento real do fenômeno OVNI seja encontrado.
Carl Sagan used to say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof or extraordinary evidence. But the evidence is not going to fall in your lap. You have to go out and look for it.
Investigadores alegam que procurar provas significa estudar mais profundamente os depoimentos mais verossímeis que foram relatados tanto pelo público em geral, quanto por aqueles que estão treinados para realmente entender o mundo à sua volta. Apesar do projeto Blue Book do governo ter sido encerrado em 1969, seu interesse pelo fenômeno parece ter continuado. Afinal, militares foram responsáveis por alguns dos mais alarmantes relatos de visões de OVNIs. Esses relatos sugerem que vários desses objetos não identificados foram capazes de driblar os melhores sistemas de segurança. Mas de todas as histórias inexplicáveis, poucas se comparam aos acontecimentos misteriosos e confusos que atingiram dois dos países mais tecnologicamente avançados do mundo. Esta era a base Bentwaters da Força Aérea Britânica. Está localizada a 225 quilômetros de Londres e faz divisa com a floresta Rendlesham feita pelo homem. A área abandonada não demonstra sua antiga importância, mas antes do colapso da União Soviética, aqui havia muita atividade. Esta base era compartilhada pela Força Aérea dos Estados Unidos e pela Força Aérea Real Britânica. Era também o local onde as visões mais estranhas foram relatadas.
I think the Bentwaters case is sort of a mainline, hardcore UFO case because it involves intelligent, educated people who are used to dealing with high technology. They're guarding it and securing it on their own base. They know aviation, they know weaponry. With security police who are trained to be good observers, they have to write all kinds of reports and defend what they say. And these people were puzzled, totally baffled by what they observed.
Essas pessoas perplexas eram funcionários militares que estavam posicionados na maior base tática do mundo livre durante a Guerra Fria. Bentwaters funcionou durante 49 anos, mas seu período mais famoso aconteceu durante os últimos dias de 1980, quando os militares e os habitantes da cidade assistiram a um incidente. Dizem que esse incidente está à altura do que aconteceu em Roswell, Novo México. Era uma noite fria e clara de inverno, quando de repente 3 luzes estranhas foram vistas no céu.
They sort of went up and down and moved sideways. They went this way and that and up and moved about. And this was fascinated. So I opened the front door, walked out into my front yard and to get a better view. And so my house was right at the end of the runway. So I stood there looking at them and I thought, it can't be aeroplanes because they'd landed in the forest.
Atividades suspeitas dentro ou próximo à base Bentwaters de alta segurança estavam sendo monitoradas naquela fria noite de inverno. Os vizinhos repararam que não foram os únicos a ver essa estranha ocorrência.
I stood there for a few minutes to see what anything else would happen, and I could hear the commotion on the base. The wind was in that direction. I could hear people shouting, calling, and vehicles start up, and I wonder what the commotion was.
3 patrulheiros militares também relataram luzes estranhas brilhando no interior da floresta. Eles pediram e receberam permissão para investigar além do perímetro da base. Inicialmente, o que eles alegam ter encontrado se tornou motivo de piada para seus colegas no dia seguinte.
I went in to collect the police blotters, the activity from the previous day and previous night, and the desk sergeant started laughing when I walked in. And I knew something interesting happened. He told me by name the 3 individuals and said they were out in the woods chasing UFOs all night and laughed, as though he didn't believe it.
A visão se tornou o assunto mais discutido na base. Mas à medida que as horas passavam, o incidente passou de motivo de riso para uma séria preocupação.
There was concern in the powers to be, so to speak, on the base, not so much from the incident that occurred, but the ramifications and the distraction, I guess is the best way to put it. Because a lot of those security policemen were guarding some very, very important materials and had a very, very responsible job.
Para que a base voltasse ao normal, o alto escalão militar enviou um grupo de sua própria polícia para investigar mais, na esperança de encontrar uma explicação razoável para o que havia acontecido. O que eles encontraram era tudo menos lógico.
The next day, several of the police went out to the area and did find indentations on the ground, and they called the British PC, the British police, who came out and wrote it off as hens nesting and rabbits burrowing. The interesting thing is there were 3 depressions which were equal distance apart, and they were all the same diameter, and the ground had been depressed the same depth. Quite interesting.
Mas a história não terminou aí. 2 noites depois, o objeto voltou. Uma equipe militar maior e mais cética foi ao local original para investigar. Desta vez, levaram equipamento extra. Esse equipamento incluía um medidor Geiger para ver se havia radiação, câmeras e um gravador. Aqui está a gravação original do Coronel Halt no decorrer dos sinistros eventos daquela noite.
Suddenly the object, the red object, started dripping like molten metal, just like coming out of a crucible. It dripped for, I would say, several minutes and suddenly exploded. There was no sound, just the poof, and broke into multiple white objects, and they all disappeared. Well, we were very puzzled at that time. We really didn't know what to think.
A perplexa equipe militar vasculhou a área em busca de pistas para explicar o que eles haviam testemunhado. Não havia nenhum vestígio no solo. Mas no céu, ao norte, havia um incrível grupo de luzes que pareciam vir de objetos não identificados. Mas as luzes não eram nada comparadas ao objeto visto no céu ao sul.
Suddenly the object to the south approached at very high speed, stopped, I would say a quarter, half mile above us, I can't really tell for sure, and sent down some type of a beam that fell right at our feet. It wasn't like an ordinary light that fans out. This came down straight like a laser beam. Illuminated the ground, a small circle, 8, 10, 12 inches in diameter, probably for about, I'd say, 10 seconds. Well, I was very concerned then. Are we getting a signal? Are we getting a warning? Or was this some type of a weapon that hadn't gotten us yet? Just as suddenly as it appeared, it clicked and disappeared.
3 horas depois, os OVNIs já haviam desaparecido, mas deixaram para trás muita perplexidade.
And we were sure nobody would believe this, and I say we were all thinking, wow, how are we going to cover this up? You know, what are we going to tell people? We can't tell the British. We can't go back and tell our bosses. They'll think we've all been out here in the woods drinking or something, which wasn't true, but there was great concern.
Arriscando arruinar sua reputação, o Coronel Halt relatou o incidente para um oficial superior no dia seguinte. Depois ele entregou a fita cassete gravada na noite anterior. Após uma reunião do alto escalão, o oficial pediu ao Coronel Halt que discutisse o assunto com o coordenador britânico. O coordenador não estava na cidade, então Halt escreveu um memorando.
I wrote a memo which has become somewhat public, I guess, and kind of cleaned it up a little bit and abbreviated what happened.
Later in the night, a red, sun-like light was seen through the trees. It moved about and pulsed. At one point, it appeared to throw off glowing particles and then broke into 5 separate white objects, and they disappeared.
And I expected a phone call or somebody to drop around to see me real soon. Nothing happened, and nothing happened. You know, days turned into weeks, and I kept asking, well, you know, is there any interest? And finally, it just became a non-issue.
A questão sem importância pode nunca ter sido resolvida, mas de acordo com os moradores da cidade, algo estranho aconteceu nas semanas seguintes à visão.
I had customers come round to my garage who were military men. I asked what was going on, and they said, well, they weren't allowed to say. And I had 1 or 2 officer customers, and I asked them, and they weren't allowed to say either. I don't know why.
Finalmente, pessoas de dentro e de fora da base começaram a falar. Os investigadores de OVNIs britânicos, Dot Strade e Brenda Butler, estavam lá para escutar.
They didn't say it was a UFO. They said something had happened in the forest. And when we came down and we actually tried to interview people, we were just stopped.
Os investigadores de OVNIs tiveram uma chance quando os militares começaram a contar uma história estranha, que incluía mais que apenas a visão. Eles alegavam que uma nave alienígena controlada por extraterrestres aterrissara na floresta Rendlesham e que os extraterrestres interagiram com oficiais americanos. Esses relatos curiosos foram ignorados e desmentidos por oficiais e também por funcionários militares. No entanto, uma coisa é certa. O que quer que tenha acontecido naquele final de dezembro parecia ser de grande interesse para as Forças Armadas.
I'm firmly convinced people did investigate. They did it from an arm's length. I was never formally debriefed. I can't, to this day, can't believe that. I do believe some people crept around the base, so to speak. I do believe there were multiple agencies with a great deal of interest that probed discreetly. I can't explain. I've had people indirectly approach me trying to pry information out and to find out what was going on.
Uma explicação para o que estava acontecendo nunca foi divulgada. Em vez disso, razões simples foram dadas para os relatos extraordinários. Elas incluíam uma chuva de meteoros e um satélite russo que havia entrado novamente pela atmosfera terrestre.
I can't rule out that a satellite didn't fall or a portion of a satellite didn't fall in that area, but how would one account for the object moving through the trees? And the objects in the sky, they did not fall down. They stayed in the sky and moved about in sharp angular patterns. And there were 3 of them.
And indeed, it does seem that some space debris did come through at around about the time concerned. But it should be remembered, of course, that the Bentwaters incident occurred over a series of nights.
Outra explicação para a visão foi uma possível refração de luz provocada por um feixe de luz de um farol próximo.
Clearly, something extremely unusual happened. The skeptical explanation that it was the lighthouse light reflecting strangely through the woods doesn't make any sense, because why hadn't they encountered that problem before since? If it's this lighthouse, the atmospheric conditions would have been such that at some other point it would have happened, but it never did. So you have something going on there that is inexplicable in the mundane. You've got very credible people who are charged with guarding a facility who cannot explain it, and if these people are incompetent, we'd better get them out of there.
Mas nenhum dos funcionários militares envolvidos foi transferido da base. E, publicamente, parecia que os oficiais americanos e britânicos não estavam ansiosos por investigar mais o assunto.
The corporate view of the British Ministry of Defence about Bentwaters' case is simply that the case was looked at the time and was not judged to be of any defence significance. Well, I've not seen that borne out by any analysis. It certainly seems to be an example of bureaucracy gone mad if you have something like this happen and people blandly say it's of no defense significance.
Anos depois, a posição do Ministério da Defesa quanto ao incidente de Bentwaters foi reavaliada. Desta vez, ele foi levado ao parlamento pelo ex-ministro da Defesa e presidente do Comitê Militar da OTAN, Lord Hugh Norton.
Oh, well, there's no doubt in my mind it was some type of a cover-up. And I think there were some misleading stories put out. Somebody didn't want the general public to be aware of what had happened.
Mais de 17 anos depois, todas as evidências físicas supostamente reunidas durante o incidente estão desaparecidas. Não há fotografias, apesar de 3 equipes de busca independentes, cada uma com um fotógrafo militar, terem fotografado. Não há discussão sobre os altos níveis de radiação captados pelos medidores Geiger na segunda noite, e nem a autenticidade das fitas cassete do Coronel Halt é considerada suspeita. Até ex-investigadores que estavam convencidos de que um OVNI havia aterrissado na floresta, hoje alegam que muitas de suas fontes admitem terem mentido. Isso fez com que os investigadores questionassem a precisão de todos os relatos das testemunhas militares.
Something happened in the woods. Something did happen. I would say that, but I'm sorry, I don't believe it was a UFO. Certainly not from another galaxy or anywhere else anyway.
Talvez a explicação para o que aconteceu na base Ben Walters da Força Aérea no final de dezembro de 1980 jamais seja conhecida. No entanto, o caso com certeza afetou aqueles diretamente envolvidos.
I think something totally out of the ordinary happened, something that we don't have an explanation for, and I'd certainly like to have one. Have we been visited? Perhaps. There certainly was some type of intelligent control over what we saw. I don't think there were little green men on board or whatever, and I really can't explain it. I'm firmly convinced there was some type of intelligent control.
Esse perturbador incidente é outra razão concreta pela qual o fenômeno OVNI não pode ser ignorado. Mas é apenas um entre vários casos extraordinários. Certamente há outros que exigem uma séria reavaliação. E eles também provam que algo fora do comum está afetando o mundo à nossa volta. Os variados relatos não deixam dúvidas. OVNIs não conhecem limites. Eles ampliaram seu alcance além dos céus e tocaram a Terra. Tradicionalmente, eles são vistos no ar ou no solo, mas em raros casos eles se tornaram visíveis em algum dos locais mais improváveis. Estas são as visões que se tornaram a base de um conjunto de provas para ajudar a provar que o fenômeno realmente existe. São as histórias que ainda são mistérios, mas só há um relato onde o objeto em questão ainda mantém sua classificação oficial como o OVNI. É um título atribuído nos anos 60 durante o chamado incidente de Sag Harbor. Sag Harbor é uma pequena aldeia de pescadores localizada a 200 quilômetros de Halifax, Nova Escócia. É um lugar calmo, onde os moradores passam o tempo prestando atenção no mar, não no céu. Mas há 30 anos, algo aconteceu e perturbou o calmo estilo de vida da maioria dos habitantes. Era 4 de outubro de 1967, quando 2 moradores da aldeia, a caminho de casa, avistaram algo estranho sobre as copas das árvores.
My friend and I were talking as I was driving, and all of a sudden my friend said, look at those lights in the sky.
When we first seen them, they looked like they were stopped. Of course, we were driving in the car and we couldn't tell if they were stopped or if they were moving or what they were.
And after we lost sight of it, and we ran around the corner, we gained sight of it for a few more seconds, then we lost sight of it again.
I know I was scared when I first got out of the car because I wasn't very long getting into the house, like to get my father and get him to come out and have a look at it. I was kind of hoping that it would stay there long enough for him to see it, and it did.
And I come home and I told my mother about it, and first question, of course, was you drinking? And I said, no, I don't think so.
As estranhas luzes foram vistas por vários moradores. Eles as observaram por vários minutos, enquanto elas apagavam e acendiam. Então, o objeto iluminado virou de lado e mergulhou nas águas do porto. Imediatamente, testemunhas notificaram a Polícia Náutica Real Canadense, a RCNP.
The people who initially arrived on the scene, the civilians who were called in to aid the RCMP, concerns were for survivors. Most people saw this thing occur from a distance, and it was initially thought that perhaps it was an airplane crash. But what the eyewitnesses saw, or in this case what RCMP officers saw when they arrived on the scene, I mean, there were at least 3 officers on the shoreline that at least saw a pale yellow light moving on the water. They all felt that it was something quite unusual.
Mas os oficiais da RCNP não foram os únicos a ver o misterioso objeto da margem. Bem ao lado deles havia um pequeno grupo de curiosos.
We all seen it, the police seen it, and everybody was, I guess, startled by it. None of the people that were there had ever seen anything like it before. And I know I hadn't.
As testemunhas não paravam de olhar, fascinadas pela estranha luz na água. Então, tão inesperadamente como surgiu, ela desapareceu. Um barco da guarda costeira foi logo chamado, mas pescadores locais já estavam a bordo de seus barcos a caminho do local onde a luz fora vista pela última vez. Eles procuravam por sobreviventes, mas a única pista de que algo havia acontecido naquela noite era uma grossa camada de uma substância desconhecida.
It was a great bubbly foam, and it was yellow. Nothing I had ever seen before. You couldn't smell no odor or anything. And we went about probably 3 lengths of the boat, and we ran out of it. And we turned the boat around, and came back into it, and we ran out of it again.
A espuma, como as luzes, às vezes desaparecia. E quando ficou claro que não havia sido um acidente, a busca foi encerrada. Na manhã seguinte, a RCNP já havia entrado em contato com bases militares próximas. Eles esperavam encontrar uma explicação razoável para o que haviam visto. Não havia nenhuma. Isso levou a aldeia de Shag Harbor às primeiras páginas dos jornais.
It's a headline story throughout the North American press and beyond. And in that it was said quite clearly, there were statements made by personnel at Canadian Forces headquarters in Ottawa saying that, yes, indeed, we are searching for the crash of what we believe to be an unidentified flying object. This is one of those rare cases where something indeed real has gone into the water, and it's not an aircraft, and it's not space junk. This was an official statement.
As Forças Armadas canadenses podem ter dito claramente que o objeto era oficialmente um OVNI, mas a questão sobre aonde o objeto foi após flutuar na água nunca foi respondida. E o Departamento de Defesa Nacional canadense com certeza pretendia descobrir. Em 5 de outubro, pediram ao Comando Marítimo para conduzir uma busca submarina. Logo, uma equipe de mergulho da Marinha vasculhava a costa da pequena aldeia de pescadores, procurando destroços no fundo do porto. Enquanto isso, os moradores estavam surpresos com o que acontecia em sua pequena aldeia. E mesmo sem nunca terem chamado o objeto de OVNI, os primeiros que testemunharam as luzes ficaram famosos rapidamente.
Everybody teased me a lot about seeing Martians and all this stuff, but I believe I see something. I did see something, there's no question about that. And what it was that I don't know, but it was something. It was definitely something.
The people of Shag Harbor had no expectations. Roswell, although it occurred in '47, did not become, a story and a case until almost into the 80s, at least until '78. And they weren't influenced by that. Shag Harbor stood alone.
Nada foi encontrado durante os 3 dias de busca da Marinha. Em 8 de outubro, a busca já estava oficialmente encerrada. Quando o interesse da imprensa diminuiu, a vida em Shag Harbor começou a voltar ao normal. Mas os investigadores alegam que pode haver provas que expliquem o incidente. "26 anos depois, o caso foi reaberto e informações não oficiais começaram a surgir. Os homens da primeira equipe de mergulho da Marinha foram os primeiros a falar. E que história eles tinham para contar?
These men are claiming that there was a second operation, and their story has been corroborated by other Armed Forces personnel, that this UFO did not stay in the Shag Harbor area, but got away under the water and went up the coast and came to rest near Government Point. At Government Point, you have a secret base. In those days, it was an American base on Canadian soil. To have an unidentified craft of any type sitting very near this facility and on some of their detection equipment would be a matter of extreme concern.
A base militar de Shelburne hoje está abandonada, mas na época do incidente em Sag Harbor, ela era uma importante frente de defesa contra uma ameaça comunista. Aqui, forças americanas monitoravam a atividade submarina utilizando um sofisticado aparelho submerso. Segundo a história não oficial, um objeto acionou o alarme do equipamento detetor e uma pequena frota da Marinha respondeu.
From our best information, 6 to 7 ships camped over the object for about a week, keeping an eye on it. Divers went down on it. One diver in particular makes no bones about it that this thing was an unidentified flying object, and there were things on it.
And as the men put it, there was still activity in these crafts. And they're absolutely certain that it was nothing from this earth, that it was a UFO. So this does go beyond the official record by quite a stretch.
Segundo investigadores, outros alegaram que também estiveram lá, tornando difícil ignorar a história, por mais incrível que pudesse parecer.
So what evidence do we have of this happening? We have 3 to 4 people to tell us the story that this did happen. We've got the integrity of the witnesses, but that's, witnesses are, we don't have the smoking gun, that's for sure, but I think we probably have the gun, but we just don't have the bullets.
A história não oficial pode jamais ser confirmada, mas certamente é mais completa. Há um início, um meio e, segundo investigadores, um surpreendente fim.
One of the things I enjoy most about the story is its end, because I suppose you could say, ufologically speaking, it has a happy ending, unlike most of these stories. After these ships sat over this object for a week, the UFOs start moving again while still submerged under the water and move down the coast of Nova Scotia and out into the Gulf of Maine. Once in the Gulf of Maine, they surface and fly away.
Mais de 30 anos depois, um incidente de Sag Harbor continua oficialmente inexplicado. Ele se tornou importante para provar que o fenômeno ainda precisa ser mais investigado.
This was a genuine UFO event. And what does that mean? Yes, it was an unidentified flying object, but beyond that, it means that it's nothing conventional. I don't know if it's something that's extraterrestrial, extratemporal, or extra-dimensional. But the thing is, there are certainly aspects of this that you cannot explain or explain away.
Talvez a razão para visões curiosas como esta não seja de outro mundo, mas de muito mais perto daqui. Após estudar relatórios por mais de 50 anos, cientistas e ufólogos ainda não conseguem compreender os evasivos OVNIs. Até hoje, ninguém encontrou sua fonte de origem e ninguém conhece suas intenções. Em vez disso, algumas das mentes mais inteligentes do mundo acabam ficando apenas com inúmeras evidências questionáveis. Registros históricos sugerem que OVNIs já existiam mais de 5.000 anos antes de Roswell. Os OVNIs já foram chamados de demônios, fadas, bruxas e espíritos. Depois, com a evolução dos sistemas religiosos, suas identidades também mudaram. Na virada do século, eles se tornaram navios aéreos. Na década de 30, eles eram naves fantasma. Durante a Segunda Guerra Mundial, eram caças do espaço. Nos anos 40, foram denominados discos voadores, mas ninguém sabia ainda o que eram ou de onde vinham. Mais de 5 décadas depois, as respostas a essas perguntas podem não apontar para uma galáxia distante, mas sim para o núcleo de nosso próprio planeta.
The Earth is a massively complex laboratory. There are an infinite number of forces that are interacting, and we really don't understand those as yet in any great depth. And the Earth does produce lights. It has its light show. And I think they're older than the human race. They belong to the very body of the Earth.
Mas a teoria de que todo o fenômeno OVNI talvez seja um fenômeno terrestre é tão polêmica quanto a ideia de espaçonaves pilotadas por homenzinhos cinzas.
In the laboratory, you can control conditions extremely well, and you can make nature behave the way you want it. And nature in the raw is much more unpredictable and much more imaginative than scientists are. And so to get these very specific phenomena to occur, I think, is a relatively rare thing because of the requirement to have specific conditions which are not often occurring naturally in nature.
Mas até os cientistas mais céticos concordam que a Terra ainda não foi totalmente explorada. Algumas peculiaridades geofísicas só agora começam a ser compreendidas. E talvez possam ser responsáveis por algumas das estranhas visões relatadas.
There are new natural phenomena, red sprites, for instance, which occur at the top of the atmosphere due to electrical discharges above thunderstorms. These kinds of things certainly fall into the class of the bright lights at night kind of observation.
Outras explicações pouco conhecidas ou pouco estudadas para o fenômeno OVNI incluem luzes de terremotos e raios redondos. Luzes de terremotos geralmente acontecem antes e depois dos tremores. Para os cientistas, elas são causadas pela liberação de gases de dentro da Terra, que pegam fogo ao acaso, criando fagulhas que voam até a atmosfera. Acredita-se que os raios redondos sejam um acúmulo de eletricidade estática, que não apenas se torna visível, mas também capaz de se movimentar no ar numa superfície longa. Mas mesmo esses fenômenos naturais não podem ser responsáveis pela grande quantidade de visões autênticas que ainda continuam sem explicação.
When you look at the range of UFO reports that have been made over the years, and thousands, presumably some small fraction of them, if they're under the right conditions, in the right place at the right time, some of these kinds of phenomena have to be considered. But by and large, what I've read, what I've seen, they don't really fit.
Talvez as luzes de terremotos e os raios redondos não se encaixem na maioria dos casos. Mas pesquisadores alegam que talvez haja uma outra causa natural de parentesco distante que possa explicar o fenômeno OVNI, luzes terrestres.
The characteristics that probably distinguish Earth lights from earthquake lights or ball lightning are that they tend to last for longer. And they often haunt particular areas like a valley, like a mountain. In China, for example, Mount Wutaishan and Mount Omai, there are temples that have been built specifically because light phenomena occur there. And the people who built the temples thought these lights were an expression of the Dharma. But that indicates to you how long lights were seen in that area, centuries.
São séculos de relatos, e mesmo assim ninguém sabe realmente como são criadas as luzes terrestres.
We are testing theories, and one of the strongest contenders is that tectonic stresses in the Earth through the Earth's geology, not necessarily related actually to an earthquake, though it can be, that these stresses produce tremendous force fields, and that through whatever mechanisms we don't really understand yet, plasmas are produced.
Segundo os cientistas, plasmas são tipos de matéria altamente energéticos. Eles são grupos de partículas elétricas onde surge a matéria. Apesar dos pesquisadores não compreenderem exatamente como são produzidos, cientistas determinaram que uma alta concentração de calor é necessária para que eles existam. Temperaturas tão altas são encontradas tão distantes quanto na superfície do Sol e tão próximas quanto nas chamas de lenha queimando na lareira comum. Com tantas e tão variadas fontes para sua criação, não deve ser incomum para os plasmas serem associados a algumas das mais conhecidas visões.
And I should also say, if we go back to Kenneth Arnold's flight over the Cascade Mountains, he saw 9 objects of light. And at that time, the Cascade Mountains, which we know are tectonically volatile, they were building up to their largest earthquake ever recorded at that time.
Mas ufólogos argumentam que mesmo que fenômenos naturais não possam ser completamente descartados como explicações para OVNIs, a pesquisa científica em andamento não é forte o bastante para convencê-los de que os objetos são produzidos aqui mesmo na Terra.
Natural phenomena don't appear and behave exactly like craft. There are patterns of their appearance, their performance, and everything else. In daylight, they're almost always metallic, shiny. It's described as metallic, aluminum-like, chromium-like, light reflective. At night, they appear to be self-luminous. They glow. And if they stop and hover, then the luminosity often fades, as if it's somehow related to their power system.
Mas o sistema de força e os padrões investigados por ufólogos talvez não sejam de origem alienígena. Segundo estudiosos de luzes terrestres, essas massas de plasma exibem algumas das mesmas características específicas.
An interesting thing about these plasmas is that at night they will shine. They will be your lights in the sky. But in daylight, a plasma can seem to reflect light and look metallic.
Mesmo assim, apesar de sua capacidade de refletir, muitos ufólogos ainda têm dificuldade em aceitar as luzes terrestres como uma explicação razoável para os OVNIs.
If they're going to talk natural phenomenon, what is there out there that has the capability to hover and then shuts off and then the object zooms straight up out of sight? There's no technology like that we know about. And there's certainly no natural phenomenon that does this kind of thing. This ain't nothing we're familiar with. This is something very strange.
Mas quando se fala em desconhecido e estranho, pesquisadores acreditam que as luzes terrestres possuem uma estranha semelhança com os OVNIs que não pode ser ignorada.
For example, you may see a ball of light here, and there's several of you looking at it from one side. If you move round, or if there's another group of observers, they can't see the light from another angle, for example. We have very strong evidence now that these lights, although they appear to be there all the time, in fact, flickering on and off very rapidly. They're here, they're gone, they're here, they're gone. They can produce shock waves in the air, which indicates mass, and then they can stop without any deceleration, which is impossible for something with mass.
Luzes terrestres podem parecer tão improváveis quanto a possibilidade de visitas extraterrestres, mas poderiam elas ser responsáveis por algumas das visões não explicadas? Como as da base Bentwaters ou da aldeia de pescadores de Shag Harbor?
Well, some of them can sit on the water and have been observed going underneath water as well. Some just come out of the ground, that's where they come from initially, and some of them will just sit there, or some will flash off over the hill and come down again, earth themselves again.
A lista de semelhanças entre luzes terrestres e o fenômeno OVNI é extensa. E nessa lista talvez existam respostas nada convencionais para as difíceis questões relacionadas às evidências reunidas logo após uma visão.
They can scorch vegetation. They'll tend to leave radiation traces in the ground. The markings that are left are absolutely as would be expected from a plasmoid object. So it fits perfectly.
O fenômeno das luzes terrestres pode se encaixar perfeitamente, mas não é necessariamente aceito como a origem mais provável de uma visão. E mesmo aqueles que se dedicam ao estudo concordam que é necessário pesquisar mais para determinar por que elas existem, como são criadas e que efeito produzem sobre a população.
We're dealing with something incredibly exotic and very, very important. I mean, I think if we understand Earth lights and all the range of phenomena associated with them, quantum physics and plasma physics will literally take a quantum leap. They will literally move ahead a decade, probably one fell swoop.
E quando entendermos essas coisas, haverá uma resposta definitiva para a questão sobre se fomos ou não visitados? Vamos realmente entender por que tantas pessoas dizem ter visto objetos não identificados? E vamos aceitar ou ignorar os inúmeros relatos que vão além das visões e para o lado mais discutido da polêmica: abduções. A dificuldade de tentar dar um sentido ao fenômeno OVNI é exemplificada pela experiência de 4 amigos que fizeram um acampamento que mudou a vida deles para sempre. Para os que catalogam essas experiências, esse encontro ficou conhecido como Incidente Allagash. Era agosto de 1976, quando Art Stevens, Charlie Foltz, Chuck Reck e os gêmeos Jack e Jim Winner saíram de Boston em direção ao norte para as florestas do Maine. Durante 2 dias, a viagem foi tudo o que eles esperavam. Era uma fuga despreocupada da vida da cidade, mas no 3º dia, no camping onde estavam, as coisas começaram a mudar.
There was us 4 and probably maybe as many as 12 people there. And it was around dusk. And we were all standing on the beach trying to keep an eye out for 2 campers who were late in getting to their rendezvous with their friends. When Jim said, "Look, there's a light up in the sky there. What is that?"
And we all turned and looked. It was just an unusually large, round light in the sky. And was sort of like moving into the wind, not drifting away from it. Thought perhaps it might be a large weather balloon.
I thought I detected a sort of a reddish tinge to the object, which made me think, well, gee, that's got to be Mars. And I said so. And there was someone else there on the beach who said, no, Mars isn't visible right now. It should be in another part of the sky anyway.
I actually had taken a pair of binoculars to see what it was. And I remember focusing in on this light, and it was definitely not a star. It was a perfectly round, kind of whitish yellow light. And then all of a sudden it just went like that, and just, it imploded in on itself. And then it was gone. We thought it was some celestial event. No one at the time said it was a UFO or anything like that. It never entered our mind.
A viagem continuou. Eles passavam os dias pescando e remando. À noite observavam as estrelas no céu. 2 dias após a primeira visão, eles montaram um acampamento perto do isolado Lago Smith, um pântano repleto de tocos de árvore. Lá decidiram pescar à noite.
There was no moon that night. It was real dark, and we didn't want to get lost. So we said, well, thing to do is make a big fire so we can see it, and then we know which way to paddle when we want to get back to camp later.
And it was quite large, but we cleared around the fire, so there was no problem. And these flames were leaping a good 3 or 4 feet up into the air.
Com sua luz de farol improvisada acesa, os 4 homens deixaram o acampamento. Eles remaram centenas de metros para o meio do lago, com destino a uma noite de pescaria que jamais esqueceriam, e que mais tarde retratariam através de sua arte.
I remember being in the back of the canoe, paddling leisurely. The 2 twins were in the middle. Charlie was in the front. And I remember they were having a conversation, and I was focusing on the night and the lake and the water. And I began to feel observed.
And then all of a sudden, Chuck Rack, who was at the back of the canoe, said, holy mackerel, what the hell is that? And I turned around and looked, and there was this huge, bright light that was coming out of the trees. It seemed like it was rising out of the trees. At first, we thought, well, it's got to be an airplane or something, right? So we watched it for a few seconds and realized that it wasn't an airplane because it wasn't making any sound at all. It was strange, very strange.
It was a bright, luminous yellow-white, and changing from that color in a very fluid, liquid kind of a way. And we were very, very fascinated. I was in a state of extreme euphoria. I remember just feeling, wow, this is fantastic.
It was just alive. And when it was nearest us, about 100 yards away, it paused. And when it paused, I said to the fellows, I said, I'm going to shine the flashlight and see what it does.
The instant he flashed his flashlight, this thing sent this beam of light out to us. And we were in a 16-foot aluminum Grumman canoe, which in the pitch black of night lit up like a Roman candle. We must have looked like this object just waiting to be approached on this lake.
And all I can tell you is what was going through my mind was just exhilarating expectation. Just, this is fantastic. This is something we can communicate with. It's tempting to communicate with us.
I was completely shocked, and especially shocked that it reacted as quickly as it did, which told us there was some type of intelligence about it. And as soon as this light came out, this thing started moving. So we thought, well, you know, this is real. This is really happening. This is not a figment of our imagination. I mean, we've got to deal with this situation now, because within a few seconds, this thing's going to be right on us.
I wasn't even interested in this thing anymore, other than I didn't want to be as close to it as I was.
I remember paddling as fast as I could, and Jack saying, it's getting closer, it's getting closer.
E então ele desapareceu. Quando deram por si, já estavam na margem.
And I thought, well, that's it. We've lost our chance. We've let it slip through our fingers. And I observed it leaving and just gradually faded out.
Exaustos, os 4 homens voltaram para o local do acampamento. Lá eles encontraram os restos da fogueira que havia causado tanta preocupação. A fogueira construída para durar horas. A fogueira que agora era apenas uma pilha de brasas vermelhas. Por incrível que pareça, ninguém deu atenção a isso. Mais tarde, isso iria ter um importante papel em suas visões, mas naquela noite nada mais foi discutido. Nem a fogueira, nem o objeto desconhecido que os perseguira momentos antes. Em vez disso, dormir era a única coisa que eles tinham em mente. Durante anos, os 4 homens raramente falaram sobre aquela estranha noite. Então, em 1978, lembranças da visão começaram a voltar. Jim Wiener sofreu um acidente de carro que o deixou com epilepsia temporária, que provocava ataques. Geralmente, os ataques eram provocados pela falta de sono. E por volta de 1980, Jim estava mesmo tendo problemas para dormir. Seus sonhos haviam se tornado pesadelos que pareciam reais.
All I remember is seeing vague figures, anthropomorphic in shape, but they did not seem human to me. They were around me, and they were either doing things with my genitals, or they were prodding me with some types of instruments. There was an extreme feeling of malevolence. I mean, I was absolutely always felt terrified in this situation.
Jim manteve os pesadelos em segredo, mas acabou contando para o seu irmão gêmeo Jack, que só aumentou a confusão.
So he starts telling me this, my nightmare, on the phone, and I go, holy mackerel, I've been having the same nightmares. What is going on here?
Nenhum dos gêmeos sabia o que estava acontecendo, mas a saúde de Jim estava em risco. E quando seus pesadelos se tornaram mais frequentes, os médicos que monitoravam sua condição ficaram bastante preocupados. Perguntavam o que o mantinha acordado à noite e, quando souberam de seus pesadelos, fizeram mais perguntas. Finalmente, um psiquiatra que trabalhava no caso dele disse que parecia ser uma experiência de abdução. Ele sugeriu que Jim conversasse com o ufólogo Ray Fowler. Fowler levou a história a sério. Logo depois, os 4 homens foram hipnotizados. De repente, mais detalhes daquela noite de agosto de 76 começaram a surgir.
One of the things I remembered very clearly was Jack saying that it's gaining on us. And I remember suddenly being enveloped in this tube of light. And I remember looking up, and I was thinking about what the heck is that up there? You know, like what's up there? And that took a few seconds, and then I looked back again, and Chuck Rack's gone. The last thing I remembered was having both hands on the side of the canoe, looking out at the water to see if Chuck was in the water, and then not seeing him, thinking, oh my God, you know, what happened to Chuck? And then looking up, and then the next thing I remembered was this just intense feeling of almost like I was coming apart or something. That's the only way I can describe it. Then the next thing I remembered was being on my back in this hazy environment, which was just like this nightmare that I'd been having.
Quando a nebulosidade dos pesadelos desapareceu, uma terrível experiência foi descoberta.
I'm lying on my back, and I'm disoriented. I'm not sure where I am. As I'm forcing and struggling to get up, a face appears and looks straight down at me.
It reminded me of insects. I remember thinking, my God, these things look like bugs. It had like large eyes, almost like ants have. They could have been goggles for all I know, but and they had some kind of clothing on, like spandex. I became focused on this thing's hand and realizing that it was not a hand like ours at all. And this one had me by the wrist, and he was holding my arm up, and he had something else in his hand. But I didn't like the looks of it. And I remember thinking, oh boy, here we go. This is it. I got 5 seconds to live. They're gonna cut me open, they're gonna dissect me, whatever. I just want to get out of here. Get me out of here.
Seria preciso horas sob hipnose para que os 4 homens contassem sobre todos os exames alienígenas. Depois, cada um se lembraria de um pedaço do quebra-cabeças que os traria de volta à Terra.
They moved us again into this other space, this room. Then this area in front of me started changing somehow. It was doing something. It was some type of machine or something. It was very strange. And the last thing I remembered thinking was, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen next, but something is happening.
Under regressive hypnosis, I remember the aliens trying to put me in the canoe. There was one of them standing in the canoe over me, trying to adjust my position in the back of the canoe, and another one was sort of waist deep in the water right next to me. And then they tried to position Jim Weiner in front of me, but he's heavier, and they were having a hard time with him. And then the other 2 were beamed right on land, and then Jim got out to join them.
Com as revelações do incidente, aliás, os 4 homens ficaram sabendo por que sua grande fogueira havia se extinguido tão rapidamente. Para os que estudam casos de abduções, isso é conhecido como tempo perdido. De acordo com suas lembranças recém-descobertas, esse tempo perdido pode ter sido de até 3 horas, começando com a visão do objeto da canoa até o momento em que eles conscientemente se lembram de tê-lo visto da margem. No entanto, saber sobre o tempo perdido não os deixou mais calmos. Na verdade, ao final das sessões de regressão, eles tinham muito mais perguntas que respostas a respeito dos eventos daquela noite no Lago Smith.
I mean, every time I had one of these experiences, you know, I would rationalize it as a dream so I could cope with it and say, well, what the heck is really going on here? You know, is it related to my seizure disorder? Is it you know, something I'm eating? Do I have a brain tumor? You know, am I working too hard, or am I under a lot of stress? What the heck could possibly cause this kind of repetitive experience?
Os 4 homens de Allagash não estão sozinhos. Sua história é muito semelhante à de centenas de milhares de outras pessoas, de todas as classes sociais. Reunidos, esses depoimentos formam um importante grupo de provas que tem recebido a atenção até dos especialistas mais céticos. E sua busca por explicações está levando a algumas conclusões radicais. Por mais extraordinário que o incidente Allagash possa parecer, é apenas um dos milhares de casos relatados durante os anos. No mundo do estudo de OVNIs, é um relatório confiável, com depoimentos firmes de testemunhas. Para os que examinaram o caso, ele confirma que uma grande quantidade de pessoas são afetadas por encontros com o desconhecido.
I don't think we have proof that people really are being abducted and taken on board ships and probed with needles and all that. Here there is no real physical evidence. Certainly there are no photographs. There is a lot of testimony, but testimony alone doesn't convince a lot of people.
If you had the amount of evidence for the reality of the Allagash abductions for any other subject, any mundane subject, in a court of law, you could hang a person probably. But because of the bizarre nature of the case, that's not going to happen. People aren't going to accept that evidence, although the evidence is there.
As provas incluem 4 homens que foram psicologicamente examinados e passaram pelo detetor de mentiras antes de serem hipnotizados. 4 homens que fizeram relatos incrivelmente semelhantes do mesmo evento. E 4 homens que passaram 2 décadas tentando aceitar o fato de que fizeram parte de algo além de sua capacidade de entendimento.
I've heard it all, everything. Oh, they must have been on LSD, and people have said, I don't believe a word you say, you're nuts, you're crazy, you belong in a straitjacket. And I say, well, it's part of my life, I can't deny it. And one of the things that's really weird is that you find yourself getting used to the idea that you've been abducted, and that's weird in itself. I mean, how do you get used to something like that?
Já se passaram mais de 20 anos desde o suposto encontro, e o incidente Allagash foi acrescentado ao imenso número de relatórios para ajudar a provar que o fenômeno realmente existe. Mas este caso não deixa de ter sua própria polêmica. 3 dos homens estão certos de que tudo aconteceu, enquanto o 4º não tem tanta certeza.
I'm not denying this happened. I'm just skeptical about the abduction part of the story. To that extent, it wasn't like a visceral reality experience. It wasn't like a true memory. And that's what I had trouble with for years and years and years. Certainly, I shared the experience with the rest of the guys, and they might take that as remembering a real experience, but it's not. The encounter is real. I know that. But regressive hypnosis several years later, I don't know.
E mesmo aqueles que estão convencidos de que OVNIs existem têm dificuldade em aceitar casos de abdução como o incidente Allagash como informação válida para sustentar o fenômeno.
They clearly had a UFO sighting. Clearly that event took place. But we've now blurred the boundary between reality and fantasy. We worked for thousands of years so that we understood that dreams were dreams. They were fantasy. They were not necessarily a reflection of reality. And yet in abduction research, if you dream about being abducted, well, that's all accurate information. And we've got to get back and take a solid psychological look at this.
Outros investigadores acreditam ter feito uma séria avaliação psicológica. Eles argumentam que nem todos os relatos de abduções são lembrados através de sonhos ou sob hipnose. Eles alegam que muitos se lembram com detalhes dessas dramáticas experiências enquanto estão bem acordados.
If you trace the history of this, before this subject was even known, Before it was all over television, before people were aware of it, the patterns were already established. So it seems to me there are only two apparent possible explanations for this. Either they really are being abducted, or there is some totally unprecedented, unknown mass hallucination or delusion going on, and that should be of great interest to science too.
Clearly, no one would believe or even take seriously the abduction phenomenon if there was only one person who was telling these tales, regardless of the social pedigree of that person or the prominence of the investigator who investigated that person. We would just say, well, that person's hallucinating, deluded, crazy. So the reason that the abduction phenomenon is a phenomenon is that many people report abductions with conviction, and that they report similar details of the experience. So the question is, where does this consistency of storyline arise from? Even if people were hallucinating, why are the hallucinations the same?
Apesar dos cientistas não aceitarem o fenômeno como um todo, eles não discutem a sinceridade dos relatos de abduções. Eles também acreditam que milhares de pessoas estão passando por alguma coisa, mas alegam também que talvez esses relatos não estejam relacionados a contatos alienígenas, mas sim produzidos por um estado alterado de consciência.
It certainly is puzzling to have as much consistency of a testimony and then not find any physical evidence to back it up. What you have to realize, and what I think mainline scientists find pretty difficult to acknowledge, is that this is not at all unique.
The human brain is the most complex object known of in the universe. We know of nothing more complex, and it produces a vast range of conscious states and mind states. So somebody's driving along, and they've been driving at night for hours upon hours upon hours. They go into trance, and the next thing they know, they're being miraculously floated off up into a spaceship. If you look at the idea of floating off to a spaceship, you are looking at perfect description of an out-of-body experience, a lucid dream experience. There's a whole gamut, a whole range of sleep disorders that fit in absolute detail everything that an abductee describes. What we have is a total ignorance of these states of consciousness.
Esses estados de consciência incluem não apenas sonhos lúcidos e experiências extracorpóreas, mas paralisia no sono e também experiências de semimorte. Todos eles estão sendo pesquisados, mas ainda não são completamente compreendidos. Talvez num futuro próximo, suas explicações ajudarão a determinar as razões para os inúmeros relatos de abdução. No entanto, se esses estados alternados de consciência provarem não ter relação com o fenômeno de abdução, os investigadores alegam que os cientistas terão dificuldade em aceitar que essas estranhas experiências aconteceram mesmo.
We've been conditioned to believe certain things regarding what society, what scientists, what theologians tell us exists and what doesn't exist. And when something intrudes into this reality and it doesn't fit, it's taboo because people don't want to accept this because it affects their worldview. So this goes across science, theology, you name it. It's very hard to accept things that just don't fit our preconceived notions of what should be. And
You can't rule it out. You either can find evidence that it's real or you can't. But you can't say it doesn't exist. You can just say, well, we've looked for evidence so hard so many times and we haven't found any, that we're never going to find any evidence and therefore that it's not real.
Pode ser necessária uma combinação entre fé e ciência para chegar à verdade desse persistente mistério. E talvez a prova necessária para convencer os observadores mais céticos jamais seja encontrada. Pelo menos não aqui, mas talvez ela exista em algum lugar lá fora.
Você está assistindo Especiais Mundo. OVNIs, visitantes do espaço. OVNIs, visitantes do espaço.
Além da falta de provas conclusivas, talvez o maior problema que hoje cerca o fenômeno OVNI seja o impasse entre querer acreditar e o medo do desconhecido.
The UFO phenomenon is a great challenge to our intellect, but even more, it's a challenge to our humility. That mankind likes to think he's in control. And if we take this subject seriously, we realize we're not. But I believe that mankind, across cultures, is fundamentally in psychological denial on this subject. We don't know how to cope with it emotionally. We can't even begin to grasp it intellectually.
It's an issue really on the intellectual scale of Copernicus Part 2. Copernicus said that we weren't physically at the center of the universe, that we were just a little blob that orbited around the sun. The part 2 of that revolution would be that we're not the only intelligent beings in the universe, but that there are others.
Pelo menos por enquanto, a questão "já fomos visitados" continua sem resposta. Mas a parte 2 da revolução de Copérnico pode estar mais próxima do que nunca, graças a grandes progressos nas viagens espaciais. Hoje, a maioria das missões da NASA são vistas pelo público como rotina. No entanto, algumas delas ainda despertam a curiosidade das pessoas, principalmente quando diz respeito à descoberta de Marte. Esse é o planeta que representou o papel principal em toda a questão da vida extraterrestre. E com o decorrer dos estudos, parece que ele já recebeu destaque máximo. Durante a maior parte do século, a questão sobre a vida em Marte foi alvo de especulação. Mas hoje, fatos concretos começaram a substituir as suposições do passado. E apesar de os resultados reunidos em inúmeras missões não mostrarem sinal algum de homenzinhos verdes, eles sugerem que em alguma época, Marte pode ter abrigado alguma forma de vida.
My personal feeling is that yes, Mars had a very substantial atmosphere early on with a lot of liquid water on the surface, and perhaps enough to form these river channels and river valleys that we see. That are quite ancient, that are perhaps older than 3 billion years old. So the issue of the ancient climate of Mars is an important one for the issue of whether life could evolve. I think you can start to persuade yourself that the possibility of life could be somewhat reasonable, actually, and particularly if you accept the postulate that if life can't exist, it will exist.
E a questão da vida em Marte recentemente voltou a ser discutida. Muitos insistem que fotos do planeta vermelho tiradas pela NASA mostram claramente um monumento construído em sua superfície. Esse suposto monumento lembra um rosto humano ou o chamado rosto em Marte. Mas apesar da extraordinária semelhança, cientistas rejeitam o argumento de que seja alguma construção do outro mundo. Eles alegam que ela foi formada organicamente, como muitas das incríveis características da Terra fabricadas pela natureza.
I can't think of a group that would have publicized that possibility or that discovery more than those of us who were looking at the pictures. We were looking for stuff like that. Our careers would have been made. We would have loved to have trumpeted to the world that we found evidence of an ancient Martian civilization. Who the heck wouldn't? And after somebody pointed that out, those of us on the lander team looked at one of the boulders on the surface nearby the lander, and we decided we could see the initials of every team member in the boulder that was about 10 feet away from the lander.
Atualmente, há várias missões a caminho de Marte ou em processo de planejamento. Mas algumas das amostras que os cientistas estão estudando não foram descobertas longe daqui. Recentemente, meteoritos foram encontrados na paisagem coberta de gelo da Antártida. Foram identificados como sendo de origem marciana. Cientistas acreditam que eles foram expelidos de Marte 16 milhões de anos atrás, quando um asteroide se chocou com a superfície. Os meteoritos viajaram até aqui, aterrissando na Terra cerca de 13 milhões de anos depois. Após reunir e analisar essas pedras, cientistas estão divulgando alguns resultados incríveis. Uma equipe de pesquisadores da NASA passou 2 anos estudando os meteoritos. Eles alegam que essas rochas de aparência comum contêm fósseis microscópicos. Eles acreditam que esses fósseis possam ter sido uma forma primitiva de vida, parecida com as que foram encontradas nas antigas rochas aqui na Terra.
And the important thing out of all of this is not so much whether these particular meteorites have actual biological material in them, but it's opened people's minds to at least accept the possibility that this may be something that could occur, and has opened this area for legitimate study.
Outra área que agora está sendo estudada é a Lua congelada de Júpiter, Europa. Em 1997, imagens enviadas à Terra pela sonda Galileu revelaram que Europa tem mais água que todos os oceanos da Terra reunidos. E segundo os cientistas, onde há água, há vida.
There could be volcanic activity down under a liquid water ocean, and it's possible even that volcanic activity is helping to keep that liquid water layer there. If that's true, then you can start to think about biological systems that relate to the kinds of systems we have on the Earth. It's all highly speculative, of course, but it's the kind of thing that drives us as scientists to want to know more about a place like Europa.
O interessante é que cientistas e céticos concordam que as informações obtidas com pesquisas de Marte e de Europa talvez sejam o laço que une os dois lados opostos do fenômeno OVNI.
I think it strengthens the hand of the people who believe that life is fairly commonplace within the galaxy and within the universe, because now we don't have just one example, we've got two or more examples nearby. So that's why this becomes of profound importance, perhaps one of the most profoundly important things that man has ever done.
Por enquanto, os cientistas têm que esperar pacientemente pelas informações das sondas espaciais para aumentar a sua compreensão do universo. Eles estão confiantes de que o resultado dessa pesquisa extremamente importante estará disponível num futuro próximo. Talvez então o misterioso fenômeno OVNI seja solucionado, apesar de muitos alegarem que isso seja bastante improvável.
It's been with us for centuries. And so the person who studies mythology and religious traditions in the world, I think I have as much to say on this subject as the scientist does. So the nature of the evidence depends on the individual and their own training and belief systems. And I say that there is a deeper process going on inside us as individuals that prevent us from looking at this evidence as objectively as we should. And we use our career as an excuse to avoid confronting this new reality.
Mas para alguns, essa nova realidade foi aceita sem qualquer pergunta. Está claro que existem aqueles que não precisam de informações concretas para acreditar. Investigadores estão preocupados com o impacto que os cultos têm no que eles consideram um campo de pesquisa sério.
I think millennial fever is certainly taking its toll on UFO research, and I think good information is being hard to come by. We know that there are people whose belief systems are operating at fanatical speeds, are tending to muddy the waters a great deal.
Mas apesar da deturpação, ainda existem aqueles que esperam que os estudos continuem.
This multidisciplinary area we call ufology is terribly important because it's a lot of different disciplines being brought together. Some of them are scientific, others are non-scientific, some are sociological, others are psychological. And a lot of people are having genuine experiences. But it does not follow that the explanations we glibly give, and I think if we understand UFOs, we'll understand ourselves and our planet a lot better.
Já fomos visitados? Talvez jamais saibamos. Mas enquanto o homem tiver curiosidade sobre o universo, a busca irá continuar.